hour of Newsnight. Let's get right to what America's talking about. Controversial redactions, co-conspirators, and evidence of potential crimes. Today, lawmakers were given a chance to review the unredacted Epstein files, and they're raising some concerns.
I saw the names of lots of people who were redacted for mysterious or baffling or inscrutable reasons. I think that the Department of Justice has been in a cover-up mode for many months and has been trying to sweep the entire thing under the rug. There's no way you run a $1 billion international child sex trafficking ring with just two people committing crimes, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. No way. It doesn't work like that.
In the ongoing battle for justice, today there was even more Epstein fallout abroad. Norway's crown princess is facing questions over her ties to Epstein, and 2 Norwegian diplomats are now under investigation. And as new allegations surface about the disgraced Prince Andrew, Congressman Ro Khanna is demanding answers from the British monarchy.
They ought to ask the king and queen questions, and maybe this will be the end of the monarchy.
Do you think it could be the end of the monarchy?
Well, if they don't have answers, or if they're implicated with an Epstein class, not a good look for the British monarchy.
The whole question is, does the king have to answer?
Well, the king has to answer what he knew about Andrew. And just stripping Andrew of a title is not enough. I mean, Andrew needs to come before our committee and start answering questions. I mean, look, if you have allegations of raping a young girl, I don't think the appropriate punishment is you no longer get to be a prince. There's got to be more than that.
I mean, isn't it strange that there seems to be at least some desire for accountability across the pond, but here it's like, well, if their name is in it, it doesn't mean anything.
That's the problem that I have, even with this statement from Ro Khanna. You're saying other people should be held responsible. We're not doing it at home. And we want to be the leaders of the world with how we protect our citizens, especially our young girls. But we're not doing that. We're not stepping up to the plate. We talk about it all the time, how there had to be more than just 2 people that were involved in this crime, yet there are no other investigations happening right now. And when you look at what's coming out, it's not being done the right way. We're not getting all the information. The information that's being put out looks like it's been combed over, vetted, and scrubbed of anything that's going to hold somebody accountable. We can't let that be the standard and then expect other people in the world to look at us as the ones that's really showing the way.
And you add to that, it happened here.
It happened here.
It happened in the United States. We should be holding any United States citizens, regardless of what positions they have, whatever anyone is implicated should be investigated in public in an open session and should be held accountable. And it is just, speaks to kind of the pervasive disregard of victims of sexual assault and rape in this country. And we have a moment where leaders, the president and others, could stand up and say, this is not okay and we won't tolerate it. But instead, they're standing up and saying, move on, nothing to see here. Wasn't a whole bunch of little girls and young women raped? It's really just disgraceful.
The congresspeople who went in and saw the files say there were a lot of strange redactions. Let me play what Jamie Raskin said about the redactions involving President Trump.
Donald Trump's name was redacted in a number of different places, and I saw one conversation between Epstein lawyers and Trump lawyers relating to the 2009 investigation, which had been redacted, and I don't see any particular reason that it should have been.
Now, if that is true, that would seem to indicate a violation of the law, because you're not supposed to, according to the law, redact to protect anyone's reputation, least of all the president.
They delayed the release of the Epstein files. They have scrubbed the names of some influential people from the Epstein files. They released the names of some of the young women and girls who were victims. They released their names and let them out. It just seems like this Justice Department is not acting in the interests of the people who they are supposed to be, which is to protect innocent American citizens. And instead, they're trying to protect the powerful. The question I have now for the president is, what's going to happen to his base? Remember, there were all these conspiracy theorists who were believing there was some child sex ring that was out there. Turns out they may have been right. There was one out there, but it wasn't just the Democrats, which is what they had said originally. So I think we've got to really ask some questions about what this Justice Department is doing and how it's going to show up politically.
Also possible that with millions of documents that have been rushed to be released recently, that they made mistakes. I think that that's an important piece of this, because I agree with you that clearly some of the people's names should not have been released. I think that was a mistake, and I think we've all conceded that that's likely the case. I mean, I don't think anyone thinks that they're doing this intentionally. What's also likely then is that some of the people's names who were redacted should not have been redacted. That is a consequence
we got to stop
of
giving
rushing.
these guys a pass.
It's 6 million. I'm sorry, but there's millions of documents that have
millions of documents. And look, in the spirit of transparency and to appease the MAGA base, it would be right to completely open the books. However, I've consulted with some friends who have an intelligence background, and what they told me is, look, there's usually a serious principle behind redactions or classification protocols, that being that you cannot necessarily trust the American public with raw intelligence. And we could consider this raw intelligence.
Why would we consider it raw intelligence?
Yeah.
I mean, the law dictates what redactions are supposed to happen. And this is an unusual situation, I'll concede that, because rarely do we have a situation where the law says, hey, you got to do it in a particular way. But in this case, the law is very clear. Victims' names and identities should be protected. Perpetrators do not need to be protected. Their names, if they are in there, should be out there. And look, I actually think, Jason, I think that your point is important to some extent, right? There are probably a ton of mistakes happening. And they're being caught. And when they're being called out for it, sometimes they're being fixed. Like Todd Blanche tonight, they have re-released several of the pages that were flagged by Thomas Massie as being improperly redacted. But I don't know. I mean, why should it take that kind of pressure? And if not for Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna going in there and Jamie Raskin going in there and saying, hey, why is this redacted? We would never know.
But, you know,
that's an excellent point.
We're
But
all
let me just
acting like they just got notice 48 hours ago. They ran for president saying they would release these files. So when they won, why didn't they start immediately preparing? It shouldn't have been the law that Congress had to pass to force them. They should have done it because they promised the American
let's take
people.
it a step further than that. Forget about the politics of it. We have victims here. The way the Justice Department works, the way these investigations work, I handle them all the time, is they do the basic investigation starting with the victims. We don't even have victim interviews here in these cases. It's so many victims that they haven't even interviewed yet. So we're talking about redacting things that come from other sources. They're not doing a basic investigation to get to the factual finding of who's responsible.
And
what
the
they're doing
victims
is pointing
have
out
said
stuff so that they can protect people.
Their victims have said that there are a lot of things missing, like their interviews. Some of them who have done interviews, they're saying, where are these interviews? Why are they not in the file? Serious questions about why DOJ is not more proactive about it, not more proactive about the redactions, but also about saying, hey, we're going to go back over some of these names, some of these people who are engaging in some really scary conversations, frankly, with Jeffrey Epstein, and ask the question, what are they talking about? And are there victims here? I think that's the question that people are asking.
Well, I mean, and I think it is important for, including MAGA base, but the general public, to figure out if there were other potential collaborators with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And I think that's worth litigating. But I think also, to your point, this is fundamentally a bureaucracy at the end of the day, and there's millions of documents. It's going to take some time. And I think, honestly, at the end of the day, Trump doesn't want this to be the sole focus, because there's so many other domestic priorities that he's still trying to achieve. And frankly, this is taking up a lot of headspace. And if, in
no
a way,
more headspace than
who
in the
cares what Trump
victims'
wants?
heads.
It's the Justice
No more
Department.
headspace than those poor women and girls will have to live with for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, who cares what Trump wants? The Justice Department should do their job and protect these victims. There are victims here. They're not doing their job. Trump shouldn't be leading this and determining what comes out and what doesn't. The Justice Department should be acting independently to find out who molested these girls and bringing them to justice.
I mean, to be
But
clear,
this is the problem. This is the problem with
to
the way
release certain documents.
He shouldn't be saying anything. He shouldn't have anything to do with this.
He doesn't have anything directly to do with it to that point. I mean,
His attorney is going to sit with Ghislaine Maxwell.
I'm sorry, but have you seen any evidence of the president directing to the level you're even remotely talking about, redacting or not redacting certain documents?
Here's the challenge with
We saw his administration bring people in to go through the documents before they came out.
For 4 years, none of this conversation taking place. So I do think that this president is doing a hell of a lot more than the previous one did.
But see, here's the problem. Here's the problem with this
Let the
exactly,
Justice Department do their
Abby.
job.
The problem is that the president, usually the Justice Department has some claim of being impartial. The Justice Department can say, we've got distance from the White House. We can't even talk to them. When I was in the White House, you couldn't even call the Justice Department to ask them when a press release was going to be released. You couldn't do it. But now the president has inserted himself so often into the DOJ operations, it's hard to know where the line is for him and when he's directing things and when he's not, because he personally has injected himself into it.
Even if it's not him personally, I mean, there are many people even in his administration whose names have come up in these files. One of them is Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. He had said at one point that he cut off ties with Jeffrey Epstein. Then the email showed that that wasn't quite true. Here's what Thomas Massey says should happen to Lutnick.
What questions do you have about Lutnick's ties to Epstein, and should he come before Congress and testify?
No, he should just resign. I mean, there are 3 people in Great Britain that have resigned in politics. The ambassador from Great Britain to the United States, the prince lost his title for less than what we've seen Howard Lutnick lie about. Look, Howard Lutnick clearly went to the island, if we believe what's in these files. He was in business with Jeffrey Epstein, and this was many years after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted, lightly sentenced, but was convicted for sexual crimes. So he's got a lot to answer for, but really he should make life easier on the president, frankly, and just resign. If this were Great Britain, he'd already be gone.
Is that fair, Jason?
I think the criticism is fair, for sure. And I do actually think that Howard Lutnick should answer to some of the conversations he had and when he had them and why he said. But I don't think he should resign based on the details we have at this point. I think here's an uncomfortable truth that it feels like no one on either side wants to acknowledge. Uber wealthy, powerful people talk with other uber wealthy, powerful people. And in retrospect, we can all say, well, they shouldn't have done that, but that's just not how the world works. And it is not.
Actually, you've been convicted of.
I don't know if that's a summary of
but that's what I agree with.
At some point, you stop talking to those people.
I also agree with
100%. I agree with you.
So clearly there's a spectrum here. Association with Epstein all the way to you could be a potential collaborator in criminality, which Democrats, to the point of how they've made this into a political football that they keep throwing around, they did imply heavily that Trump was involved potentially with criminality with Epstein before any of this had really come to light.
Interesting? The Miami Herald, Julie K. Brown, she has a news story out today where she has a quote basically from Trump to one of the investigators in Florida, basically saying everyone knew. Everyone knew what Jeffrey Epstein was up to and what Ghislaine Maxwell was up to. And I think that there's a moral question on the table, which is that if you knew and you continue to associate with this person, what does that say about you? And should there be consequences for that lack of judgment?
And Lutnick had indicated that he hadn't had ongoing conversations with Epstein, and then we find out that he did. And this isn't about people meeting, crossing paths at the golf course, at the country club. This is someone who was convicted of a terrible crime and people who continued to associate with him. I mean, you have to be held accountable for that. Actions have consequences, and those actions were immoral. There is no question.
The moral part, which I actually completely agree with, is a political question. It's not a legal question. And I think that's where a lot of this gets mixed up. This idea for accountability in the context of we want to go after the people who are directly legally responsible is separate from the political question. These are political questions. And it would be less political if we had an equal number of members of Congress or political pundits who are also targeting anyone who's a Democrat.
But here's where that line blurs.
And they're clearly.
But they have been. Larry Summers has had to resign.
Last word.
Here's where that line blurs. When you have political people influencing the ability for legal people in the Department of Justice to do their job and find out who was involved legally.
When did the investigation stop?
When did it start? They haven't even done the basics of the investigation.
You're putting the blame. Well, they've done parts of the investigation. That's obviously true.
We're what, 20 years out?
You're putting the blame on the president when you have
I'm not putting the blame on the president. I'm putting the blame on the situation that we have thousands of girls that were impacted, and we have 2 people that have been held accountable for it.